Hello and welcome to what we think is going to be an amazing panel with Jack, who's a principal within the Project A investment team. And he's going to be discussing all things Metaverse with you. So handing over to Jack.
Thank you, Sam. Hey, everybody. How's it going? I hope everyone's had a great conference so far. This is sort of the oasis, if you will, of the conference. We're here to talk about something in gaming, something more relaxing, perhaps. And my slides, which I'm going to show you, has a lot of pictures, not really much else. So please drop your pen, drop your paper, grab a cup of coffee, and let's have a chat about what it is that is happening in the metaverse. So when people think of the metaverse, I'm going to put my slide deck on. Present. For the most part, this is kind of what they will imagine. It is literally Ready Player One style. If you've seen the book, if you've seen the movie, or if you read the book, it's kind of cool. The main character, Wyatt, goes into a big battle, battling the big evil megacorp of IOI for the control of this really big video game. If you control the video games, the #1 company in the world in this realm, then you win a lot of money and you live a very comfortable life. So quite an interesting dilemma. How the characters live in this video game. So I think for the time being, at least for this session, I wanted to sort of keep on this theme here because that's kind of what we all imagine anyway when you hear the word metaverse. And goes through actually the movie is a bit strange. Goes through part of the movie and how that compares to essentially what is happening today from technology and adventure and a games perspective. So bear with me, this is gonna be quite fun, hopefully. So the premise of the movie is that this person called James Halliday, which is a Hollywood imaginator of a kind of what Mark Zuckerberg might look like, I guess, back in the 80s and the 90s, created a company called GmbH Games, which is actually the #1 biggest, largest company in the world in that time. And they made a virtual reality game, a very big virtual reality game called the Oasis. The Oasis is kind of by definition what we know today as a metaverse, where you can log in, spend time with your friends, your dates, go dancing, if you will. And then, of course, have big battles and adventure quests and look for loot and items, things like that, right? So this is kind of what we're familiar with today in our minds as kind of the metaverse, if that makes sense. These games are accessed in this movie, at least by VR. You wear suits, you wear glasses, you wear sort of feedback elements, gloves as well. So it's very immersive, very futuristic, kind of cool, right? If you imagine a game like that, and this is a couple extracts taken from the books, not the movie, but the book, we imagine, we're viewing the Oasis as part of the movie and the visuals. What is interesting is that you can see how they make money. And how they make money is actually pretty similar to how the games today makes money. This book was written back quite a while ago. So people, in the first paragraph, people buy accessories, items, clothes, feature cards, stuff like that. All these items are very digital. So they're very similar to the skins and NFTs we see today in Fortnite, or the NFTs that's happening today, sort of in the next generation. The book describes, at least, is a centralized server. So unfortunately, it is not a decentralized on blockchain or something, but that is sort of one of the monetization mechanisms. The second one is saying that, the second paragraph is saying that, hey, people in this game actually ends up paying for transportation when you go between the worlds of the Oasis. That is not dissimilar if you imagine if you play Candy Crush, you have to wait for a few lives, you click a button and you pay something and suddenly your lives come back and you keep playing, right? So that mechanism has been there for quite a while, saying that you just spend time a bit faster. And then lastly, which is one of my favorite, is the subscription model for things in the game. So, when you fire a bullet or something like that in the game, there's a bill at the end of the month to tell you, say, hey, you spent this much money. A bit like AWS, a bit like perhaps even Netflix, right? Depending on what kind of items being charged. So this is an imagination of actually today very common monetization models in video games and consumer in general in the Oasis, so in the meta world. So as every good story has of a villain, this is Sorrento, effectively. He is the CEO in the movie, but he is the head of department in the book of a company called Innovative Online Industries, or IOI for short. Very mega evil corp kind of stuff. So in the actual movie, IOI is the second largest corporate, mega evil corporate in the world. And they effectively made their money by selling VR gear kits and so forth to any player that wants to play in Oasis. So it is very interesting at the moment to understand the fundamental dynamics here in this movie world, is where you have one really good mega corp called GmbH Games, who makes one Oasis game, and that's a content creator, if you will. And then you have a single monopolistic supplier as well that supports essentially the access to this game. So that's, in terms of meta world, probably not as commonly seen in the real world. What I mean by that is, I think the closest company that I've seen so far, just kind of is like Oculus and Facebook, where they make glasses to access a meta world of VR realm. Ironically, Facebook, as you might have heard, is becoming a metaverse company. But realistically, today, Oculus is not going uncompeted. So HTC, which is also a VR glasses maker, Sony, and soon Valve will make their own sort of VR glasses as well. So the market share for these 3 or 4 types actually fairly even. So we don't have this sort of very singular, evil, monopolistic megacorp situation happening here. Now, that is one very important point. The second one is, does that happen in the content world then? Is there one very mega good monopolistic power? And the answer is no, there isn't really. So this is the top sort of, I guess, 14 companies. There's actually 2 caveats in here. The top 14 companies by market cap, the 14 biggest gaming companies market cap. The caveat here is that Tencent, as you know, is a Chinese company. There's also a huge roll up of WeChat in there and various other e-commerce activities. So that's an outlier. C Group is also Southeast Asian. They own a bit of e-commerce along with their gaming side as well. And Sony, as you know, does movies and every other kind of things. But as they call the pure play gaming players, everything from number 4, which is NetEase, to number 14, which is GameStop, which probably shouldn't be there, but it is. Let's just leave it there. They're all around sort of the 60 to 20 billion market cap, right? There's not one huge outlier there. So in the current market and the way the industry is, the power dynamic is structured, it's actually very difficult to see one of these companies building a huge singular metaverse, or it's very difficult to say these companies ever join together by removing their walled gardens and say, hey, we're suddenly going to collaborate for some reason on one single game. That concept here in this current, today's, I guess, market dynamics for content is also very difficult, very similar to how the VR sets and stuff are going. So that is one, I think, key strategic point I'm trying to make here, is that from a commercial perspective and a strategic perspective in the gaming industry, it is actually quite difficult to get to that sort of very holistic, immersive meta world. What the outlier, I think, potentially in that group of companies I just showed you is this company called Roblox, which you might have heard of. The difference here is that unlike the other bigger gaming companies who are making patent or IP-based games, i.e. they come up with a FIFA game or they come up with a shooter game, Roblox is a sandbox game. So they allow their users to make their own content, also known as user-generated content. So this is somewhat a bit similar to the Oasis model, where there's different kind of worlds and people can make them themselves as well in the fictional sense. Here, if you ever play Roblox on mobile or on PC, you can scroll through this different kind of worlds. They're like a Netflix model. You pick which one you want to play, you log in, you buy something similar to the rest of the gaming monetization models I put before. So I think this is interesting because we're starting to see a very clear trend in early stage venture capital, that there are actually a series of professionalized studios out there getting sort of VC funding through US, Europe, Israel, China potentially as well, that are making actual content for Roblox. So these companies sit under the umbrella of Roblox. They are professionalized game developers and makes user-generated content for the Roblox realm. So this is probably the most similar concept I can think of between what's happening in Ready Player One in terms of the Oasis and owners of that, and then IOI, who is basically feeding a monopolistic kind of relationship with that gaming company, right? So this is almost similarly to a parallel, but it's still at the very early stages. This is, I think, today might be what's most similar what's happening in quote unquote the metaverse. So that was the strategic side of the metaverse. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the technical side. So If you imagine, so this slide's supposed to be black, by the way, so it's okay. If you imagine sort of the biggest battle scene in Ready Player One, the movie, there was this scene here where everybody is fighting the evil bad corp to take their castle away, effectively. But this scene, while it's very easy to render from a movie perspective, I enjoy watching it, to have this in the game is tremendously complicated. Because fundamentally today, you have to fit everybody into sort of one game realm and everybody has to talk to each other. The sheer amount of computation between players increases exponentially as time goes on, as players goes on. The density is a problem, right? So imagine fitting all of these people into one server in your cloud, and then have them interact in real time, and have these objects like bullets and catapults and magic and whatever else going against each other as well. This is actually computationally very difficult. The closest company that's done this today is a company called Improbable. It's very much happy to be here in the UK with us as well. It has 4 million funding from SoftBank. This is by far sort of the best known example of a company trying to tackle this particular density problem. The screenshot here is from a game they call Scavengers that's soon to be released by one of the studios. And they ran a test, and in this case is about 10,000, not necessarily players, but 10,000 computer players and some real players mixed together into one hosted server. This is still a pilot. This is very much in a controlled environment. But this Improbable has been trying to sort of launch in this realm of metaverse capacity technology-wise, probably for the last 4 years at a very minimum. Their distinct approach is that if you look at the left side, in a normal gaming world or in the normal games that we play today, you have a single engine. So in Unity and Unreal, typically, it makes a world. So people, places that we hang out at, for example, you imagine Fortnite, and then sits on top of a server, and then people connect to a server and you play the game. That's pretty straightforward, right? But if you imagine something like the Oasis in Ready Player One, and you imagine the amount of technical service it takes today to do that, it looks something very similar to the right, but way, 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 way bigger. And this becomes essentially a distributed compute problem. It's saying, how do I break down a problem across different servers and then combine them back up again? And then doing that in real time. That is actually a super difficult problem to solve. So today, again, no one's really solved it. This is the envision architecture. There's some essential problems around, hey, the more players we have, the more servers we need. And as I mentioned, if you imagine the handshaking problems, that every time you go into a room when there's 6 people, how many shake hands do you need? And the number of interactions in that set increases exponentially. For every person you add into a room, that person's got to shake more amounts of hands, right? So this is the same problem with gaming, and got to fit that into a server, which means that in theory, up to a certain point, the amount of server costs you have for each additional player becomes so high that it isn't worth it adding more servers. And that is a current limitation of today's technology, to be very frank with you. One of the solutions for this is actually quantum computing. It is a little bit far away, but that does break that linearity context in terms of distributed compute. But my point here is, and sorry if I lost you a little bit along the way, is that to sort of make that Ready Player One Oasis kind of game, today's infrastructure is not quite there yet. It could be maybe within the next 3 years in a very limited, controlled kind of gaming world, but to have that mass experience is a bit difficult, to be frank. So, which beckons the question, what are we looking at a project A there at the current time from a gaming perspective? So we have expanded to be a gaming fund. We had one original investment in Electric Game Box. It's very cool. It's actually a VR on-premise digital internet experience, actually one of Sam's companies. And we have now started investing in a couple of gaming studios and more interesting on the gaming infrastructure side. So the premise and the thesis here, which I demonstrated with 2 examples in relation to the game, is that this place is very fragmented, right? So you're not gonna really have a singular multiverse as metaverse in one go. You're most likely going to have a couple multiverses, a couple games that people want to spend time in usually, and then we're going to build things on top of that. So the things that we're looking at today in sort of Project A venture scope is obviously very popular NFT and cryptos, gaming as well. So having that NFT element of true ownership in a video game, what does that do to player behavior? Does it improve retention? Does it improve monetization? That kind of things, very interesting for us. Where the second thing we're looking at is always infrastructure. So the improbable problem that I was mentioning before, that is still a very big problem, but also around networking, deployment, anything that means you can do this sort of across metaverse scaling at scale, right? This also includes economy, avatars, and things like that. So anything that's actually cross multiverse as opposed to a singular metaverse. And lastly, and this is actually quite important, we're spending time on good old-fashioned content. So games where people actually want to spend time in, because we don't believe that out of the 15 companies I showed you with very similar market caps, that one of them is really suddenly going to hit a very big jackpot and own the entire industry. That'll be regulatory scary as well. But we believe that there is potential for 1 or 2 or 3 games in the future to be at that scale over the next 10 years. And we want to back those founders and those companies. So that is kind of the overall thesis for us here at Project A and sort of my thoughts on the metaverse. There's one last thing I want to share with you guys, and that's this is more of a side thing. I don't know if you guys remember the movie, but there's one side business for innovative online industries, and that was to actually not kidnap, but forcefully hire the people that own some money, who spent too much money buying VR gear, all that kind of things, to actually work for them in that sort of farmhouse, as I mentioned before. And they pretty much treat them like really bad employees, right? So they actually rent them out the VR gears to build in a day. It's a very much like a loan shark kind of style arrangement. I came across this because I'm actually, and disclaim this really carefully, I'm actually a token holder of both YGG and Infinity. But I came across this article on CoinMarketCap about sort of loosely explaining how they work. So a company called YGG, Gamer Guild, is actually renting out NFTs to other players so they can participate in the economy of the Axie Infinity. As a very light and loose parallel, this is probably the most similar model I've seen sort of to the IOIs of the world. It's very early days, and thank goodness both these companies are based on a blockchain and they're sort of decentralized organizations, which is good. So they might not be in a super monopolistic powers, but this is sort of the most similar model to date I've seen to what IOI could be someday, or could be IOI someday. So we might have some time for some questions. Sorry, I ran this a little bit fast, but yeah, I mean, thank you for listening. Thank you for coming to PAKCon. I hope to see you, in my view anyway, in one of the many multiverses or metaverses, so just a single. Okay, Sam, you may have to moderate some questions. I can't see the software.
Yeah,
if there is any, perfect.
There are some questions. We have one question, which is from Mads. Netflix is working on entering the gaming industry. Do they hold an advantage towards getting first to the metaverse?
My opinion only, disclaiming that, of course. No, probably not, I would say. I'll say the ones that holds the most advantage going to the metaverse are companies like NVIDIA, AWS, Google, potentially. Anyone that has a very heavy infrastructure expertise for the technical reason I said previously. If you look at Netflix's strategy as a whole, they realize that they probably own a good share of the video entertainment market. But from a leisure time perspective, i.e. Jack or you have an hour a day we could spend on entertainment, they're losing out to gaming. So that's sort of why they're actually trying to capture that market from a revenue stream perspective. And they also have a very strong IP in part of their portfolio. Squid Games, which I watched and I was a bit crazy, I loved it, is now one of the most popular games on Roblox. It actually is the most popular game on Roblox, I think. So they have a very rich portfolio of IPs they can turn into games and essentially bring them into the family. But so far, they have been on a more acquisition path, and they're actually building a very big single one universe type of play. But I could be wrong. That's my opinion.
Nice. So we have another question from Mila. If it was only one company or team to lead the way eventually within the metaverse, who or what kind of team would you trust the most? Seems like there's a lot of individual crypto folks teaming up to work on this.
Yeah, so that's a good question, because part of this I don't believe we'll probably ever get there in a singular world sense, because imagine the amount of problems the big tech companies are getting today with antitrust laws in the US. Like, imagine if the world actually did exist as part of the movie does, and that's the governments have failed effectively. What I would say, for example, Star Atlas is a good example. A sort of example what's happening. The core management team, actually probably all crypto experts and tokenization experts, the actual development of those games, of the actual Star Atlas game, even though it's raised 5 billion or something like that, is actually being outsourced to a couple work for hire studios. So they're contracting houses. The team there themselves are not really developing the game themselves. They're more managing the crypto side of things. I personally believe as long as you have that segmentation of management, then it will be quite difficult really to integrate a pure crypto type frontier of a game to make that into the multiverse. I do think someone like potentially NVIDIA will have a fair go at this, someone like Unity, someone like Unreal will have a more engine, have both expertise, right? I think those players might someday have a proper go at this if they find the right content partner as well. But crypto on its own by itself, maybe not enough.
And so we have another question from Raphael. Talking about quantum computing, do you see cloud computing getting mainstream adoption in the coming 5 years? And how important is the tech to facilitate an interoperable metaverse beyond various multiverses?
Ooh, okay, so I used a lot of buzzwords in my presentation, I do apologize. By cloud computing, I think you mean cloud gaming. I'm gonna go with that and let me know if that's incorrect. So Stadia is the poster child, and then I think Amazon has a version now. It was called Lite or something. Anyway, let's use Stadia as an example. So Stadia launched with a lot of buzz, went pretty well, but now if you look at what's happening, they're pretty much solely dedicated to single player, low resolution, kind of cartoonish games. That's like most of the content pretty much on Stadia. The main reason behind that is simply bandwidth. So this isn't actually necessarily a compute problem. It's out of the infrastructure by the internet companies. We just can't transmit that much data between servers and computers back and forth while computing there, while multiplayer, while high definition, right? So that's really, we have graphics, you have commands, you have a lot of things being streamed. That just doesn't hold up today in the current infrastructure. Not because of cloud, maybe mostly the infrastructure bandwidth, which is why actually in the book, IOI started as a telco as opposed to anything else. I do think once they solve that problem to allow multiplayer games, and that is a good start. And eventually, I think, as I said before, the Googles or the Unity, the Epic, or the NVIDIAs of the world will start building towards that maybe someday, very futuristic. But I think it's only the start. It will, and it's still quite early days. Probably within a 3-year time period, that problem might not get solved.
Nice.
Are we running out of time, Sam, or do we even?
We have 2 minutes. Maybe just one last question from me.
From you, okay.
to get your view on play to earn gaming that we've seen develop recently. What's your view on that?
I think it is a big thing fundamentally because it does change the player engagement dynamics fundamentally. So instead of actually spending money to play something, you're now kind of spending time to earn money while playing something. So that from an emotional perspective of a gamer is very important. And you see that sort of from the Axie Infinity, rise of Axie Infinity, and this impact on actually the entire country of the Philippines, which is the biggest user base. And they actually carried a lot of families out of poverty by playing that one game, right? So I think that in itself is extremely powerful. What that means at a later stage of scale, if you look at how Axie is doing right now, is that it takes about $600 to $1,000 to buy the 3 animals you need to enter the game. And this is how sort of companies like YGG started to rent out these items to people. That has other implications because there are also a lot of speculators in the crypto world, as there always should be. I am one myself. Essentially boosting some of these prices up and so forth. The question kind of goes, if the speculators ever simply disappear, or they're not, simply the game is there for game playing sake and not speculation sake, what would the economics look like in that sense? And today, no one really knows, but this is literally the hottest topic right now in sort of early stage gaming investment.
Nice, thanks so much. Awesome, cool. I think we are at time now.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for Sam hosting.